a piece of pottery that can function just as a piece of pottery, or you could do something sculptural along with it. Does that make sense? Okay. So technically, I'm doing the very same thing that you did with your faces. I'm just sort of patting the clay out a little bit, and I want to make a slab of clay. So you all have done this. I'm just doing a little refresher here for you of how to pat it out a little bit, and then you'll all set up some little stations. And you guys remember you used double sticks to roll out, right? Okay. So we'll roll out with double sticks, and I find if I start in the middle and roll my slab, it tends to roll out a little faster. Forgive me, guys, I have a cold, so just forgive me. I'm kind of not all the way here with you. Did you record that?
Yeah. You're enough. You're here enough for us. You're doing fine.
And when you're rolling your slab, what you're trying to do is stretch evenly. You're trying to get the clay to go out in all directions. If you just roll one way, the clay's going to shrink just one way, right? So you want to roll a lot of different directions. And you noticed I flipped it over. So your first time you're rolling it out, you're going to use the double sticks. Then we're going to take two of those sticks away, and we're going to roll it out a little bit thinner this time. So I'm rolling one way, and then I'm going to lift the clay, turn it,
Jack, do you have a note?
and flip it over.
Yeah.
Okay. Put it on my computer.
Right? I'm going to roll it a little bit more. And the reason you're using the sticks is the sticks are giving you a consistent thickness for your clay. You probably don't need a piece this big. This is plenty large. But what we're going to do is press the clay into a mold. We're going to do a press mold, and then we're going to add coils of clay, and we're going to build on top of it. And the form that you're going to make, the best description I can give you is a globe or a ball or an orb. Can you visualize what that would be? Like my hands are doing this. That's what we're going to start out with, and then everybody's going to adapt in the way they want to go. So I've figured out this technique, and it's not just me, other people have done this, but for you all, I figured out the way of doing this by using these plastic bowls as our mold. So we're going to press the clay down into the mold. Okay? Sounds pretty basic. There are a couple little tricks that might be helpful. One, it might help to smooth the clay a little bit. So these are just scrap pieces of plastic from Atlantic Tire and Service Center, but they actually help smooth the clay a little bit, which is kind of cool. Also, these blue scrapers work, so you can smooth the clay with that as well, but I kind of like these little plastic. They're just advertisements, but they work pretty well. Then you guys know that your clay sticks to the tabletop, right? So we have to have something to release the clay so that it won't stick to our plastic bowl. So we'll have these plastic sheets cut for you. Mr. Kimple and I will cut these, and they're just plastic trash bags. And we're going to stretch them on to your piece of clay. And you want to try and avoid as many wrinkles as you can. You won't get rid of all of them, but get rid of some of them anyway, and try to smooth it out. There'll always be a couple. It's nearly impossible to get rid of all of them. Because I've used this piece of plastic already, it's going to have a little more wrinkle, but don't have big wrinkles in it. You guys get to pick between these two sizes. So this is the bottom section of your form, and then we're going to build up from that. Okay, so you decide which one you want. It doesn't matter. Clearly, for this form, I'm going to use this big circle. I wouldn't need that much clay for this one. Does that make sense? You just roll out a smaller amount of clay. This is probably too much clay for that form. So what I'm going to do is cut it down a little bit. That was the chunk of clay that I had set out from a previous class. But I'm going to cut this down a little bit. And all of this extra clay is great clay to work with. So you guys remember, you save your clay and you wrap it back up, right? All right, so for thickness, You can see that it's about the width of the stick, and I rolled it. And again, reminding you that the rolling pin on the sticks is wide. That's why we use the sticks. It keeps it all a consistent thickness. Okay? All right. When you start out with your form, you may want to cut it in a circle. When you roll it out, if it's not into a circular form, it'll be a lot harder for you to put it into the bowl. So let me stretch it on here again. I meant to cut that before I laid my plastic on. And I have a few little wrinkles, but actually as I press on this, they're not deep wrinkles in the plastic. They're just a few of them on there. Okay, here's the part that people mess up on. So you guys aren't going to mess up, right? When I place this into the bowl, I want to ease it into the bowl. So when I lay it down, I have this little bag called a beater bag. There's just something that are homemade. It has some sand inside of it, and I help support the clay around the outside edge, and I'm going to press it down into the bowl. So the first step, quickly get it inside of the bowl. Okay, the mistake that people make is they lay it on top and they allow it to flop over the edge, and when you let it flop over the edge, you're going to get a crease in it and it's going to get a crack. Clay has a memory, and because it has that memory, it's going to remember that it had a crack in it, and like 3 weeks from now when you're firing it in the kiln, it'll get a crack in it because you let it. I'm going to do a bad thing. This is what you don't want it to do. You're letting it flop over. See the crack that forms right there? So you don't want it to be doing that. Make sense? Yes, so you get it laid in. And you might have to have 2 people doing it together, but even that amount of flopping over the edge, I've already got cracks in this form. So press mold pottery can be actually really cool. You can do a lot of neat stuff. I kind of like this shape. It's real organic. Looks pretty cool. It's not what we're making for this class because I want you to learn how to control the clay. But it's just a press mold. So there's a lot you could do with this later other than the assignment that Mr. Nkimple and I are having you take. I'm going to take some of this extra clay out. So where it is overlapping, I want to pull the plastic out of it. Got a little bit of extra clay. I'm going to hold this up for you to see it. So I just kind of cut some of the excess out up in here, and I'm going to overlap that clay, and then you guys know what I'm talking about when I blend it together because you've done that with your faces that you're working with. So I'm going to get the extra clay out, blend all of these parts together, and you overlap the clay a little bit. So I've sort of overlapped each of those parts. And then we'll use our little beater bag and get it to lay down into the bowl. Get it all the way down in there. I still have one more little fold. And then I'm going to curve the form towards the middle a little bit. The circumference of your bowl, this part of your bowl, is going to be the widest part of the form you're going to make. So we're not going to make forms that go out and then out. You know, we're not going to go like that. They're going to come in and get smaller than this circumference. Does that make sense? So now this is going to look ugly. I really think these are very ugly at this stage. But what I want to do is get this to be a smaller circumference. And I'm just going to kind of pinch the clay a little bit to get it to aim into the middle. See what I'm doing with my fingers? And I've got a little overlap here, so I probably need to cut a little of the extra clay out. The tool I'm using to cut the clay out is called a fettling knife. It has a wooden handle and a blade on it. You may have used it when you were cutting out your tiles, but it's the best one when you're trying to just cut a section of clay out. So I'm sort of pinching. And again, this looks really ugly. To me, it's just really, really unattractive. So inside, I'm using the wall of the clay, and I'm actually pushing really hard to blend the parts together where the seam was located. How many seams did we have, guys? Do you remember? 3? Did I have 3? 2, 3. I had 3. So I've sealed them on the inside, but look on the outside. Do you see how they're not sealed on the outside? But if I tip it into the bowl, I can just use the bowl to support it and blend the clay. And I'm supporting with my hand on the inside as well. And then this little blue scraper is just super handy. It'll smooth the clay for me. And then I can go back into the bowl and support the clay again with it in the bowl. And then probably one more time tapping it. And I like using these particular bowls we got with the specific reason that they're really a great curve. So I can clean up any of these edges by tilting this bowl, tilting it different directions in here, and then the curve is just very consistent. So we'll actually have half the pot made in one class period. I've got a short class today to demonstrate because what do we have? 35 minutes?
Yep.
Yeah, and you guys, it'll take you longer than 35 minutes to do this because you all are sharing the tools and you weren't set up like I was. You know, I already had everything out. So if anybody's starting this tomorrow, is anyone finished with their faces yet in this class? So if you're starting this, it's kind of nice where you start it with just 3 or 4 people at a time. Then it's easier to get all the tools out. So I've kind of evened it out a little bit. I've got my form pretty consistent. I'm going to do one more tap down into the bowl to make sure the bottom is consistent. And that's the beginning of kind of an ugly start, but that's what you want it to look like. Does that make sense? Okay, next mistake people make. At this stage, I want to pinch it in again, ever so slightly. So again, I'm aiming towards the middle so that my circumference continues to be smaller than the circumference of the rim of the bowl. So I'm going to pinch in one more time. And I'm going to do it the wrong way, so you'll see why this is so important. But I'm going to do it the right way first. So I'm just aiming it in, and I want to always be able to see the inside, what I'm pointing to, the inside rim of the bowl. So my fingers are in at the point that I want to always be able to see. Got it? Right? Okay. The reason for that is because I'm going to start building on top of this, and there's going to be weight on it, and as I build and build and build and build, I'm going to do the wrong thing. Does that make sense? As you build and build and build and build, it might start flopping over the edge. And when it flops over the edge, the weight of it will start to put a crevice or a crease. Can you see that? Jack, do you see that? The crevice, the crease. Do you guys see that? You're the only person's name I know, you and Jake, so the rest, that's why I called your name out. Okay, do y'all see that crevice right there? It starts to look like a giant acorn. That is, as you build and build and build, it's going to keep cracking and cracking and cracking. So you get it, right? Oh, God. This class is going to be perfect. They're actually not going to make that mistake. So I'll fix it. Mine's fixed now. And another thing you can do is if it still feels like it's going out too much, you can use a little paddle to sort of tap it to go towards the middle. This is like your foundation right now. You want to get a good foundation. You want this to look as if it's going to be a perfect orb, smooth surfaced, no indentations, no cracks. You just want a great foundation. It's like when you build a house, if you don't have a good foundation, the place is going to collapse on you. So everybody wants to jump into the next step quickly, but I can't emphasize enough that you want to get this part done and done right and looking like it's aiming towards the middle. And now I've got a nice gap all the way around. You with me? Okay, questions about this stuff so far? Nothing? It's actually kind of fun, guys. All right, so I've made thousands of coil pots. This is just a technique for making pottery. It's an ancient technique. It's been used. Basically, the reason we know about ancient civilization is because of shards of pottery that's been found around the world. Some of the earliest civilizations, the way they could carry water or food was because they learned how to make pottery, and they could go a little bit further away from the food source or from the water source. So it's an ancient technique, but just because it's an ancient technique doesn't mean that it has to look like it's ancient. It can have a very contemporary look to it if you want to. So y'all are going to get to pick what you want to do from this point on, other than that we're making some kind of a vessel or container. Okay? All right, next step. You are going to make coils, let's see, coils of clay. And how many people did that in elementary school, where you rolled out ropes? Probably everybody. Did you do this? Like where you rolled out snakes or ropes or whatever? If you didn't, God bless you. You didn't get to work with clay in elementary school? I don't know what I would have done without having art class in elementary school. So you can roll out a coil of clay, and you just, use both hands, one hand, however you want to do it. You roll it out, and it gets pretty consistent. Where it's thicker, you push a little harder. So you guys have done this, right? Okay, so we're going to speed things up a little bit here at Gibbons. We're going to use a kind of cool tool called an extruder, which is over here. And there are parts. I laid them out here so people could get a picture. So this is the base to the extruder. This is the die we're going to use. If you ever had a Play-Doh fuzzy pumper, it's the same concept. You need the black dot in the back corner. So when I set this up, I'm now putting the black dot in first. These pens have threads on them, but this is so old. Because it's so old, you don't need to screw it in. It's been used a lot. I went ahead and cut some clay to have it ready to go into the extruder, but this won't quite fit. So whatever your clay looks like, you guys should be saving your clay from hollowing out the back of your clay tile. We will moisten all that clay and wedge it together. Wedging means kneading it over here on the table. We'll use that clay again. And then when you put it into the extruder, I'm going to put 2 chunks in so we have enough. We're just going to squeeze it out and make our coils. So this is made out of an old car jack. I mean, a potter came up with this idea. I thought it was a brilliant idea. This part right here needs to always be tight. If it's not tight, so let me do it the wrong way. If it's like this, do you see how it wobbles up and down? Even though this is stainless steel, it's going to break. There's a lot of pressure on this, so you need to make sure it's snugged up. Now, not so tight that you have to get tools out, just hand tightened. And when you use this tool, one person touches the handle. If you have 2 people doing this, it'd be very easy for someone to get their fingers pinched in here. So we don't want anyone to get a broken finger, right? So only one person touching the handle at a time. But it's kind of nice to have a second person. One person squeezes the clay out, and another person comes over and catches it as it comes out. Ooh, air pocket. So you'll squeeze them out, and then we have a tray set up here for your class, and whoever's making the coils for the day, you'll just lay them over into this tray. And it's pretty easy to just lay them into the tray evenly. And And I'll go ahead and use one of these now to show you what we're going to do with it. So it's a little smaller than the one that I rolled out. Oop. This one's not long enough. So now I'm going to make this form get smaller. And when you lay your coil directly on the top of the edge, it'll go straight up. When you put it on the outside edge, it'll go out. When you put it a little bit on the inside edge, so the circumference is going to become a little bit smaller, it'll start to come in, right? We're not going to lay it on the outside edge because it's going to get heavy and it's going to flop over. And you remember the example I showed you? It just flops over. So we're going to either go straight up for a little bit or aim it in, a ball, orb, right? Got it? But all these will look a little bit different. And Mr. Kemple will show you some samples of some different ones. So this one's a little bit too long. I like to be across from where they overlap one another. And then I'm going to start blending the layers together and smoothing the wall. So I have a few little wrinkles that are a little bothersome to me. And you really want to blend the layers together, completely together. I'm not just rubbing the clay over the surface. I'm getting them to weld together. So the best way I can describe it is if I lay some coils together right here. You want to actually knock off the top edge so that it ends up being a flat wall. Does that seem clear? Am I going to be on YouTube? Please don't put me on YouTube without my permission, okay?
I'm not.
Okay, all right. And then you do the same thing on the back side, okay? But the thing is, then after you've blended it together, then you can smooth the wall, and then it's no longer like logs on a log cabin. So it's easier for me to show you on this piece, and we can pass it around if you want to. You can see that I smoothed it in one section, and it's unsmoothed in another. Smooth and not quite smooth. Make sense? You can pass it around if you want to. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to blend my coil. And the next thing you need to remember is take your time doing this.
Sorry.
It's actually just sort of, I don't know, meditative, I guess. You don't have to solve a math equation. You know, you don't have to memorize facts and figures. You're just blending your coils of clay. It's kind of nice. It's sort of relaxing in the middle of the day. But I will have some people who just get in such a big hurry. They want to put 3 or 4 layers on all at the same time and then blend them all at once. And what we're trying to do is get a nice, even, consistent form. So I wouldn't do that. I would only do one coil at a time. And then after you've blended your coil, both on the inside and the outside, and smoothed it, then you go get a second coil and you put the next one on. And when you come, so I started opposite where these two guys connect with each other because sometimes the clay stretches to get to that point, okay? But when you get to the overlap, where the two overlap one another, you can slice through both of them. You have that extra clay, and then they'll go right together, and I'll blend those together. And now I'm going the opposite direction from when I blended this way, and now I'm going opposite that, and I'm blending the two coils together where the ends were. I have my hand on the inside. You can see where their wet fingers are, that I'm supporting the clay as I do this. If I don't support the clay, it'll just flop in on me. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the inside. The But because we're getting close to the end of the period, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to blend the inside, but I'm not going to get it all done. Okay? But what you have to remember, this is the big mistake that people will make. You have to support the clay on the outside as you're blending it, or it'll start flopping over and it'll make that ugly acorn ridge, right? Okay. So now that I have it all blended, the last step that I'm going to do is use this little blue scraper. We'll pretend I blended the inside, but because we're kind of shorter on time, I may not get to that. So I'm supporting the clay, and I'm using the blue scraper. I'm tipping it around inside that bowl for the first couple layers. I won't have to tip it pretty soon, but I have to be able to get in to that edge. I think using long strokes helps make it nice and even and consistent. So I'm just sort of blending, and I'll do about half of this one, and then we'll show you the difference between the two parts. Yeah.
Are we filling it up all the way to the top, or are we going to leave that?
I don't know what you're going to do.
We get to pick
You're going to kind of, and let me show this, and then I'll address that, okay? Give me a second, and that's a great question. What I want you to see is this side has been smooth with the scraper. That side was just my fingers. Do you see the difference in the two? Look over here, girls. Smooth with the scraper, just with my fingers. So do that step, and then, to answer your question, Gabby, you're going to add more coils, but you're going to have to decide what it is you're trying to design for your form. So everybody has the same basic starting globe. Do you feel that that's, what other word would we use other than globe or orb or, it's not really a bowl because bowls are wider. What is it? A sphere? Yeah. What?
A dome.
A dome. Yeah. Y'all got that part, right? So Gabby, then what you do is you decide from this point, are you going to build up a little bit? So perhaps it's going to, you know, I just kind of have fake walls here. Come up straight. And then maybe it's going to have a little flare out, perhaps. Does that make sense? Yeah. Or it could be, and that's all on how you lay things on. It could be you're going to bring it in and then come in even a little bit more and continue that kind of orb, globe, dome and have a little opening right here. I would say they're vessels, they're containers. And we'll show you some samples, lots of other examples of what to do, but you're going to decide, this part is all going to be the same for everybody, but as you come up, you could do sculpture on it, you know, you could have objects on the side of it, things coming off the side, you could have openings, you could have a lid, there's lots of options, yeah.
Two things. So one, what are the probabilities of this breaking in the kennel?
Well, there are lots of probabilities of everything breaking, but if you have air pockets in your clay, you could have problems with it exploding in the kiln, so we don't want any air pockets in it. If you have clay that's too thick, remember Mr. Pimple told you to hollow out your faces, so it's about a 1/2 inch thick, so it's about this thickness. The clay is going to lose its moisture. We fire very carefully. I don't have a lot of accidents in the kiln. I have accidents in the kiln when people make things too thick or they have an air pocket in it. So if you close this all the way in and there was no way for the air to escape, you'd essentially be making a clay bomb, which, you know, people think is funny to do, and they try to put them in the kiln and they blow up in the kiln and they damage their friend's project and then they're not happy with them. So don't make clay bombs. We're in high school. That's a middle school thing, you know.
If I go to middle school, will they let me do that?
If I go to middle school.
Okay? So, guys, at the end of a class period, first of all, your first day that you roll your slab out, you may or may not get the slab rolled out and pressed in. It may not work. So you just take your clay and you do it again the next day, right? You understand that. It's just clay. You just pound it out and do it again. If you get it made, you may not get the coil put on. So whatever stage you're at when you're working with this, you're going to need plastic to wrap it up. And you're going to want to keep that plastic nice and tight in next to the walls of the pot, because if you just wrap it with an air pocket inside, it's going to dry out. Does that make sense to everybody? So you tuck all this in nice and tight, and you probably need an extra bag. And as you build these, some people have gone a little taller than others. You know, we're not making this. This is a 2-week project. You know, if you love doing this, you'll get to make more things, but we're not making giant projects. We're making smaller scale ones. But wrap these really well. Now, when we get to the shelves over here, we're probably going to revise how these shelves are set up, pull out a few of those so we have enough height. But you notice how these don't take up very much space. So we'll be able to get probably about 6 on each shelf. So we may have to revise how we set everything up.
Are we each gonna have our own bowl?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of these bowls. And how many people think you want this size? And how many people want the bigger one then? Yeah. And you know, it doesn't matter, it's all going to be the same. And we'll tell you more. This is just the starting point, okay? Then, after you've started this, and after you've worked on it for a little while, it'll be possible to sculpt on this, or to carve into it, or to brush and paint different details on the side, and we'll show you some samples. But if you get the basic start, that's like having a piece of blank white paper. You've got the beginnings of a fresh start. So at the end of class, when you're done, you guys need to wrap these coils up, whatever coils. This will be for your class right here. So you want to wrap the ends and keep no air inside of it. And your tray will be the second tray down. So the first tray will be for one of my classes. The bottom tray will be for one of my classes, and you guys get the middle tray. And then somebody has to make sure that this gets cleaned out every day. So the way you take it apart is you just back it out. Take all this clay, and we're going to wrap the clay up every day when you work with it. You pull the pins out. Do not lose these little pins. And usually you have to stick your hand in to take out the die. It all goes in this little white bowl so we don't lose any of the parts. But all this clay is great for somebody else to work with. This is the clay you guys are working with, brownstone. This right here is not brownstone. It says 50-50 little loafers. This is your brownstone. This is little loafer. Do you see that there's different clays over here? So don't just grab any old clay. The middle is going to be the clay you guys work with. Bless you. Bless you. All right. Other questions?
No.
Yeah.
Face project, we like squirted water into it. Do we have to keep moisture?
You may have to. Yeah. Yeah. It'll be similar working with the clay. Yeah. You guys put your stools back, please.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Dason. All right. That makes sense to everybody?